So are you planning your first international trip and you're feeling a little bit nervous about leaving the country for the first time, traveling somewhere new with a new language and a new culture, and you're bringing your kids along? I get it. It is so stressful and there are so many things that you have to think about, so many things that you need to learn and look into. And so I'm here today to share the 7 things that I researched before every international trip. So I'm Sarah, welcome to our channel. And if you are new around here, my husband Andrew and I have 2 daughters, Haley, who is 5 years old, and Delaney, who is 2. And since a really early age, we really wanted to get our kids out and traveling and exploring the world. Unfortunately, since Haley is 5, that means that she was born in 2020, and we all know how we spent 2020. So that's not something we were really able to fully realize until the last couple of years. So since Delaney was about 11 months old, we have been to France and Germany and England, and I'm so excited because we are getting ready to plan our next international trip to Italy and Denmark this spring. And since my brain is filled with all things travel and planning and prep, I figured I would bring you guys along with me as I plan for this trip and share all of the things that I think about, how I book Airbnbs, and all of that stuff. So make sure that you subscribe and stay tuned so that you can follow along as I plan for our upcoming trip. So back to today, and this video, we are talking about the 7 things that I researched before every international trip, especially if I am bringing my kids along. And so to start it off, the first thing that I research before every international trip is to just go to Google and do a simple search of traveling to insert country here from the US. And that sounds really simple, but this can give you a lot of information really quickly and just kind of the highlights of what you need to know before entering that new country. So often the first result for this will be a link to the Department of State website, and they will have a whole chart and table for you of everything you need to know, from their passport regulations, any sort of authorization ticket you need to get in. For example, I know that the UK has already implemented an electronic travel authorization, or an ETA, that they now require travelers to have as they enter their country. And I believe it's just something that you easily fill out online. It is something that went into effect after our most recent trip to London. So I don't know all the details about that, but if there is any sort of paperwork you need to fill out ahead of time, you'll be able to find it on this Department of State website. So this is a really easy way to get started and get your head wrapped around some of the things that you might need to know for your trip. So the next thing that I look up that kind of goes along with the information that you'll find on the Department of State website is the passport laws. So luckily our passports are still several years from expiring, but I have seen and heard lots of horror stories from all different people all over the internet of planning a whole trip and then they show up to the gate at the airport and the passport laws for that country say that your passport has to have at least 3 or 6 months left until its expiration date, and if it's less than that, then you're not allowed to enter the country. So you need to check to see what the minimum requirement is for the validity of your passport and when it expires, because you don't want to be turned away at the gate after putting all the time and effort into planning a big trip. So check those passport dates, check the passport laws, and make sure you know everything for you and your kids before you leave. Now, the next thing I like to look up before any international trip is the currency that that country uses. And that doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to the bank or going somewhere to get currency to bring with me. I don't usually tend to travel with the cash, but I think it just helps me to know what kind of prices I'm going to be looking at, especially looking at the conversion rate. I know, for example, we went to Iceland a couple years ago and their conversion rate and their numbers are very different from ours. For example, a burger could cost 1,700 Icelandic krona, but that's really only $12. But when you see $1,700, your brain starts to freak out because that's not the scale for our currency that we use here in the United States. So since that trip, I have found that it really helps me to kind of see, like, the euro is fairly similar to the US dollar, but other things like kronas and other places, the conversion is really far off. So just do that research, know what kind of currency you're going to be looking for once you arrive to your destination and what that conversion rate is, so that your brain is prepared when you arrive on your trip. Now, the next thing I like to look up before any international trip is the language. And this might be really obvious for places like Spain will speak Spanish, France will speak French, etc., but there are some places where the language might not be as obvious, so it's good to know what language the menus and the directions and all the things that you are going to be looking at is going to be in when you arrive on your trip. So once you know what language you need to be prepared for, I think it is really, really important to try to learn some key phrases, manners, foods, etc. before you leave for your trip. You are a visitor to this country. You should not expect everybody to cater just to you, so I think that it is super important to learn some basic greetings, some basic manners, please, thank you, excuse me, help, and just some simple words. Especially, I like to focus on food items because I know that eating is something that we really love to do on our trips, and I like to be able to read menus and know what is and isn't in all the dishes that I'm ordering, and I just feel like that is just the least I can do as I'm visiting this new country and this new place, is to learn a little bit of the language before I go. Now, there are so many different ways you can do this. I personally use Duolingo just because I have a 1,500-day streak going and I'm not going to break it anytime soon, but there are tons of language learning apps, and even something as simple as just going to YouTube and searching for key phrases in French or important words to learn in Italian. Wherever you're going, learn a little bit of those phrases, and that will go a super long way with the people that you meet on your trip. But I and the people of the country don't expect you to be fully fluent in their language. So worst case scenario, have Google Translate or some other translation app on your phone, and those things work really well in situations where you have to communicate with someone who doesn't speak English. All right, and now on to number 5. The 5th thing that I make sure that I know before I leave for any international trip is what kind of plug adapters that they use. So in case you don't know, there is no standard electrical plug across the world. And although that is very frustrating as someone who is a frequent traveler and has to have all different sorts of plugs and things for different countries, it is not something that is standard, and it is important that you know before you leave what kind of plug you're going to need. For example, we went to Italy back in 2019. We bought Italy plug adapters. They worked great. We had an awesome time. And then a couple years later in 2022, we went to Iceland, and I was like, oh, they all use the same ones. It's fine. They don't. So we didn't have a plug adapter for the first day, and we were able to find one on day 2, but it was way more expensive than something that I could have gotten here at home. So be prepared, do your research, figure out what kind of plugs they use. There are also universal plug adapters, which we have now invested in, and you can use those in different countries, which are super helpful, but just make sure you do your research and you know what you need before you go. All right, this next thing that I researched before any international trip is for all you parents out there, especially the ones with super young children like me, and that is car seat laws. So if you've watched any of my Pack With Me baby gear videos, you know that we have traveled with a car seat in the past on our international trips, and sometimes it's been great and sometimes it's been not so great, but it is something that we are trying not to use as much. But I do know that a lot of times public transportation laws are different, and you might not need a car seat, or they might have car services that offer booster seats or car seats for your children. So know yourself, know your family, know your trip, and what kind of transportation you're going to be taking. Like when we went to London, we never sat in a car the whole time. We were on trains and subways and planes. So we did not need a car seat, but I do think it is important to know as you're going into your trip, in case you need a taxi, what their laws are going to be, what kind of things that they offer, and to just be prepared for that, because you want to make sure that your family is safe and that you're traveling and moving in a way that is comfortable for you. All right, and then the last and final thing that I researched before any international trip is things about their culture. So what kind of food is that place known for, especially if you're going to a specific city, like we are getting ready to go to Italy soon, and first thought you might think, oh, Italy's known for pasta or pizza, but there are so many specific dishes that are unique to each city. So I love to know what that city is known for, and I want them to be able to show off, and I want to try the food that that specific city is known for, so that I can immerse myself in their culture, and so that I can eat the way that the locals eat and really get the most out of that city. And then in addition to the food, even though personally that's my favorite part, I like to just research general cultural customs of, you know, how do you greet people when you walk into stores? Is it rude to tip? What is the way to be the most courteous in a restaurant or in a store? There are a lot of little things that I think it's important to know, because again, like I said, you are a visitor to this country and you want to show that you are showing up, you want to learn about their country and their experiences, and that you are doing your very best to try to fit in. And then in addition to the food, the cultural aspects, the sites I need to see, I also like to look up where certain amenities are, like grocery stores or pharmacies or things that I might need to know in an emergency with my family. Especially when Delaney was young and she needed diapers and formula, I made sure before I knew what were the grocery store names, where were they located, which ones had diapers, which ones didn't, what kind of formula I could expect to find there. Just doing a little bit of research. It doesn't take too long, whether it's asking in a Facebook group of people who have traveled there before. People will have plenty of suggestions and answers, or just doing a little bit of researching on the internet. You can find those things, and that will make your transition into that country and your time in whichever cities you're going to a lot smoother if you know where those kinds of things are and what you can expect to find there that your family might need. So I think that about wraps it up for today. Those are the 7 things I absolutely research before every international trip. I find that those things have really helped make our trips and transitions to these new countries and new cultures so much easier, and especially because I'm bringing my kids with me, I'm responsible for them, for their safety, for making sure they have a good time, and knowing those things going into my trip has made a world of difference, and I am so excited to dive into the Italian culture and to learn about all of these things and make sure that we are super prepared going into our trip in a couple of weeks. So thank you so much for tuning into today's video. I hope that you found all of this information helpful and that you now feel a little bit more prepared for your next international trip. And I hope that you will subscribe and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when we post new videos, and so that you can follow along with this Plan With Me series, and so you can see how we plan for our trips, how we feel prepared, and all the things we take into consideration as we go through the planning process. So again, thank you so much for watching today, and we will catch you in the next one.